get the same thing. I'll be in a meeting and someone will say, do you think this is a good story? Like they want that validation from me. And I'm like, you have to believe it.
Welcome to Behind the Work, the show where we focus on all things leveling up, glowing up, and becoming our best selves. I'm your host, Jessica Santana, and I'm bringing you the tips, tricks, and strategies that help us reach our highest potential. So, whether you're working at a company, building your business, or you're just trying to level up, this is for you. At Behind the Work, we believe that we all have to go up together, so make sure you're tapped in. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Work, the show where we focus on all things leveling up, glowing up, and becoming our best selves. I'm your host, Jessica Santana, and whether you're tuning in from your car, your kitchen, or your desk, I'm so glad you're here this week because today's guest has a story you absolutely do not want to miss. Today, we have the honor of sitting down with my girl, Pauleanna Reid, a celebrity ghostwriter, communications advisor to CEOs, and the storytelling force behind some of the most influential voices of our time. She's the woman that leaders call when they want to write the book, the speech, or the message that will define their legacy. Pauleanna is on a mission to help disruptors shape the future, one story at a time. And today we're going to be going behind the work to learn about how she does it all and why powerful storytelling is a wellness practice, a leadership tool, and a strategy for impact. So, Pauleanna, welcome to Behind the Work.
Happy to be here.
Of course. So I always start off every episode with like how I meet people because a lot of the guests that I've had on the show have been people who've been part of my life for a long time. And Pauleanna and I met. This has to be at least like 8 to 10 years ago in some way or form.
Yeah.
We were all coming up in New York City, and she had a really big New York City network. And what I really always loved about Pauleanna was her authenticity, her ability to build strong relationships with people. And when I think about who is a master master networker and someone who just knows how to keep in touch and really value the people around her, Pauleanna is one of those people. And so I'm so happy that we get to chop it up today. And I'm really excited to tell your story. And so with that being said, Pauleanna, I want to start with your origins, right? Because I think it's important for people to know that folks don't just get to success, right? Like
Right.
there are things that happen along the way that get people to where they are. So if you had to tell the story of little Pauleanna, where she's from, what her aspirations were, what would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I like to say that I'm a woman who has fought for her dreams and won. My background stems from everything from, being neurodivergent to navigating mental illness to feeling unworthy, being bullied in high school, dropping out of college, like struggling to, read and write. Like, I think people would be very surprised that I had a very slow learning curve growing up because my brain functions a lot differently than the average person. And so I'm someone who beat the odds. I first fell in love with storytelling because, despite the stats today and not putting babies in front of screens, I was a screen baby and I turned out fine. Okay. And I used to watch Arthur and Magic School Bus and Power Rangers and Sailor Moon. And I used to fall in love with the architecture of a story, right? Like the climax and the emotions that would rush through me when Miss Frizzle would wave her fingers and the Magic School Bus would appear. And I think the seeds were planted when I was a child sitting in front of the TV every Saturday. Me and my brother would back in the day, there was a physical TV guide and we would highlight all the shows we wanted to watch. And slowly but surely over the years, I told myself, I want to be a storyteller. I did not know how I defined storytelling. I did not know what medium or path or vertical I wanted to take, but I knew how stories made me feel. And I knew that I was also someone who was quite shy growing up. And I knew that, I would always tell myself, one day when I find my voice, one day when I get the courage, one day, when I'm on a platform, I am not going to shut up. Like I am going to step into my power. I knew I was meant to be successful. It was just a matter of when it was going to be my turn.
Yeah. That's such a powerful, powerful narrative, Pauliana. And I think that the one thing that has drawn me to you personally, and I think that what draws a lot of people to you is your ability to be open about the resilience and the rebuilding of your life, and how you followed very untraditional pathways to get to the level of success that you are, that you're experiencing. Pollyanna is not a basic chick, y'all. This is a seven-figure entrepreneur, and to get to where you are, knowing what I know about your story, I think requires a level of vulnerability. And you've done such a good job at telling your story in a
Thank
world
you.
that times oftentimes tries to silence us. And so I know obviously, you were a screen baby, and that really passionate about telling stories. But when you think about like what made you feel empowered to share your voice and how you learned to lean into your voice, like where do you think that came from?
It came from being bullied as a kid
Mm,
and being silenced by teachers, feeling misunderstood, and watching everyone around me hold the pen and rewrite my reputation or my story in school. Like just being mute and watching the narratives. Because, in high school, there's bullies, there's gossiping, there's fighting, and just watching all these narratives pop up with not just myself, but others that just were false and not true. And I felt empowered because I wanted to have more control over my life. And I hated feeling like I was always a backseat driver. I was always like someone who's just like kind of in the corner. I'd eat lunch by myself in the library, or I do homework by myself. And I was just afraid of my bullies. I didn't want to get beat up. But I had this gift brewing in me. Like deep inside, I was a social butterfly. Deep inside, I did want to speak up. I did want to stand up for myself, but I just felt so disempowered by the people around me, by the folks around me. As I mentioned earlier, I'm neurodivergent, so I have a processing deficiency. And so my brain has a hard time comprehending the information gathered by my senses. And so during this time when I was in high school, it was undiagnosed, right? And so I had a slower learning curve, and academically, I was very behind. I failed many classes. I struggled with reading and writing for a great deal of my life. And yet I still had that fight in me, like my report card was so against the odds of me becoming a professional writer. I failed English twice. I went to summer school and night school every single year in high school. Like and now when I think about where I am and the CEOs and the celebrities and the politicians and the athletes that I advise, it's like, God makes no mistakes, and where you're at isn't where you have to stay. And right now we're seeing a world where, you have to fight. You have to fight. You have to, you know, I can get emotional, but it's like there has to be something inside you brewing where you have to believe that nothing is impossible. And so yeah, it took that belief in myself to just know that I could do it, even though every adult in my life told me I would never make a living from my art, told me I would never make a living as a writer, told me that I should play it safe, that I should get a cubicle job, and which I did. I did have a 10-year season of being in corporate. But I fought for it. That's it. I fought for it. Also, I will say this last part. I struggled with mental illness for a great deal of my life. I've been managing it for many decades, but I also feel like when you've hit rock bottom, there's nowhere else to go but up. And so I did hit my rock bottom during my college years. And I do feel like I was given a second chance. And so I've spent the rest of my life proving to God why that second chance was worth it.
Mm, that is such a testimony, Pauliana. And when I think about your story and I think about what you've built for yourself, I think it is such a evidence base for people who really see see an opportunity for them to choose themselves every single day. There were many moments, based on what I know about your story, where you could have just been like, "Yo, I'm done." You know what I'm
Oh
saying?
yeah, I mean, any one of us who are Black women, women of color, men included, we could all default to being a statistic, right? But I did not want to be, And also, too, I think for those of us who are entrepreneurial and go-getters today, like yourself, again, being a screen baby, like I also would watch documentaries. Like I had examples of success around me. I didn't know them personally, but I also feel like you don't need to like touch your mentors, right? Mentors could be anyone around the world. Don't need to know you exist. So I would just pay attention, right? I knew if there was a blueprint, and this is why it's so important for leaders, especially women. I encourage them to tell their stories because you don't know who's watching, and you don't know who you're influencing and who you are. You're changing like the lives of future generations. And so I would see other people doing their thing, and I'm like, yo, like I want some of that, and I want some of that, and I love her confidence, and I love her style. Shit, that girl's fly. Like, and I aspire to become her.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Pauleanna, I remember many years ago, you and I sitting together in my office in New York City, and you were like, Jessica, you need to tell your story. Jessica, you need to write. Jessica,
Yeah. I annoy all my friends. Yeah.
yeah. But the thing is that, let me tell you, like, even though you might have seen that as like you annoying me, it actually got me thinking a lot about why I wasn't telling my story at that time. I think there was a lot of fear around like me being vulnerable or me sharing my story and then have the world not receive it well. And I think that when you're a CEO, like so much of what you're building around you, especially when you're a founder, like has a lot to do with the pain points that you've personally experienced and you trying to design the world that you wanted to have around you. But at that time, Pauleanna, there was so much fear inside of me that really crippled my ability to use my voice. And then last year, when I went on this work sabbatical, I was like, that has to change. I was just like, you have to tell this story, which is like how this podcast came about, how I'm dropping this weekly newsletter, right? And it's been very, very healing for me. And I think in your work, you've been working with high profile leaders and celebrities and CEOs. And you've decided to go into the work of ghostwriting as your lane to help, these leaders actually elevate their stories. So what made you want to write for people who are shaping culture and the future? Because you're a very talented person. You could be doing anything, right? Why ghostwriting and why help people tell their stories?
There's a few different reasons. So when I knew I wanted to be a writer, automatically I thought journalism when I was back in college, right? And so I started my career as a journalist, writing for every major newspaper across the country. So for your audience members who don't know, a lot of people assume that I'm from the States because honestly, I that's like my second home. New York is my second home. And that's how we met. But I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada, right? Which I deem as an opportunity desert, which is why I had to expand. And so I started writing for newspapers across the country, then elevated. I'm widely known for my work at Forbes.com, where I've been freelance reporting for 8 years. But here's the thing: when it comes to entering any industry, you have to see around the corner. You have to be ahead of the game. 10 years ago, I knew that the world of journalism was not going to serve me in the capacity that I really needed it to fulfill me. And 10 years ago, I could see where it is today, right? So I knew I had to, number one, pivot. And I knew, number two, I had to create a sense of ownership over something. So that's why I created my agency. Now, how I got into ghostwriting is because a woman told her story about being a ghostwriter. I didn't even know what ghostwriting was. Someone wrote their story in a publication and I read it and I said, what the hell? I said, what is a ghostwriter? I couldn't even believe that she wrote books for high profile figures. It spun me. And I was like, okay, I'm like, I could do that shit. Like what? And so the first thing I did was, I gave my dreams a test drive. And so I remotely worked for a communications agency. And my first ever assignment, and that CEO of the agency is still my mentor 100 years later. And that first ever assignment was to ghostwrite a speech for one of the most renowned supermodels in the world, for one of the biggest stages in the world. And I nailed it. And the team had no edits. And that was evidence to me. I'm like, okay, I might have something here. The second reason I want to say is because cancel culture erupted many years ago, and I got angry. And a lot of our passions, they fuel us because we're solving a problem. And cancel culture erupted, and I would always ask myself, who's advising these people? Like, how did we end up here? Like, I would get so pissed off because of silly conversations that were happening publicly and mistakes and tweets. And I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to come in with a fresh perspective. I had thoughts and opinions about what was going on in the world, in pop culture, et cetera, in business. And ghostwriting did that for me. And the last thing I'll say is just creating a pathway for Black and Brown women to consider this as a viable career option. There's not a lot of us. I am someone who's very well known in this space as a Black woman, but there's not a lot of us. There's a handful of us, and I probably know all of them. And I want to encourage more women of color to understand that there are lucrative careers behind the scenes. You don't always have to be in the spotlight. But this is also a profession where you can leverage your brilliance, right? So when someone hires me, they're not just hiring a talented writer, right? They're working with someone who's a confidant in human diary, a brand architect, a structural thinker, someone who can decode ideas, a woman who has a proven track record of navigating cultural, societal, and generational sensitivities. And, clients really lean on me for communication strategies and storytelling frameworks. And so I pride myself on really knowing my shit. And I want to influence people in positions of power. I want them to question, what are they standing on? What are they fighting for? What conversations do you want to contribute to? And so my team, over the years, we've solidified our place in this field.
For sure. Yes, you have. And I remember a conversation that you and I had a few years ago where the topic of cancel culture came about in our conversation. And you told me in particular that you wrote about these two people. I'm not going to say who they are.
Yes.
But you wrote about these two people, and I was just like, well, why? And I remember you being like, I don't think that people get the full story about these two people. And I want to create an environment where people get to see people's humanity outside of what the media is
I can't believe you remember that. That's so wild. Yeah.
I do, Pauleanna. I do remember.
I had questions.
Huh?
I had questions.
Yeah,
I didn't want to just believe the main narrative. I'm like, yo, I have questions and I want to hear their side.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I love that you did that. I remember when you did it. I remember people were just like, well, okay, this is great. I didn't even know things about these two individuals. And I'm just like, yeah, because Pauleanna is out here doing the real work of uncovering people's humanities, right? Outside of what it looks like to be affiliated with things that might not be cool, right? Or things that make people uncomfortable, but you actually did the work to go behind the scenes. And I think that what I love about that is that what you're doing essentially is empowering people to own their narrative, right? And I think that people don't realize that when they don't own their narrative, there's a cost associated with that. So what do you think people lose out on when they don't own their story and own their narrative and kind of let the world just say what they want about them or create a story of about them that's not even true?
Here's the thing when it comes to storytelling. So essentially I think what you're asking me is also, how do we take the ick out of storytelling? Right. Because a lot of people just opt out. They're like, listen, I don't have time. I don't know how it'll benefit me. I'm scared. All of these excuses. So I want to give some tangible advice when it comes to leaders approaching storytelling. Number one, you take the ick out of storytelling by not placing so much weight on the accolades and accomplishments, but leading into the stories behind the process, the work, and the people involved, right? Number two, you look at social media as a form of self-expression, right? So taking the ick out of it means using social media as a tool to build your network, to build your community, to share your thoughts and opinions about the things that you value, right? The topics that you're interested in, to form connection and build bridges, right? I think that's really important. Number three, storytelling is strategic self-promotion, right? And so what I want people to understand is that by telling stories and sharing your narrative, you actually influence potential clients and opportunities by 50%. It's a great way to persuade individual. You have to think of it as, so number one, let me say this. I think every woman needs to master the art of marketing herself, and storytelling is a great way of doing that. But number two, when you think about your business objectives, right, whether that's landing clients, corporate deals, partnerships, etc., a lot of times it's not necessarily about the awards and accomplishments. They want to know who the heck are they working with, right? And so I think we ought to lean into a place of openness and vulnerability, and just understanding that at the end of the day, there's a human on the other side of that title. I was in a pitch meeting with the NBA many, many years ago. I had this beautiful deck, this effortless delivery. I'm so proud of myself. And at the end of my presentation, the executive said, that was really great, but tell me something about you that's not on your deck. And I was a little bit flabbergasted because I was like, girl, what are you talking about? And it just taught me that, like, you can tailor parts of your story to meet the needs of the individuals you're talking to, right? Like, meet the needs of the prospect. And you can use storytelling as a way to build credibility, right? So that it doesn't necessarily mean harping on the sad parts of your narrative, right? But it does mean, what have you earned the right to talk about, and how have you taken the path from point A to point B? So I think that's really important. And share your lived experience. So that's how I double down. Like, so I don't get bogged down with like what's trending right now. What should like? I talk about my lived experience because no one can duplicate that, and it's what I know to be true. So that's that's a high level of how I approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with ghostwriting, you are required to step into someone else's voice and truth. And I think that for you to be able to do that, it requires you to build trust with that individual. In your years of experience, like, what do you think stands in the way of leaders not being able to open up fast enough, or open up in general, that also makes it hard on you as a writer to tell their stories? Like, what do you think those blockages are?
So one thing I always tell leaders is to assess their proximity to a topic, right? I don't think every leader needs to talk on everything. The other thing I will say is fear of consequences, right? And that's what, and when it comes to storytelling as a leader, you really have to know yourself, right? That's why I ask these key questions, like, what do you want to fight for? What are you standing on? What are your morals and values? What conversations do you want to contribute to? And we go through like a very thorough evaluation and assessment, in which in the end I produce a communication strategy to build out their audiences and their content pillars and their key messaging, etc. It's a very thorough document. And so I think that's important too. Like, most people just they don't even know themselves, so how can they speak to the people, right? And then I'll say, just like, fearful of social media as a whole. Like, how do I navigate it, and what is the ROI? I think, like, obviously, like, data driven leaders say, like, there has to be an ROI. And what's really beautiful is that, like, the ROI, while I can give stats and research, but the greater part of storytelling cannot be measured, right? Like, I've been storytelling online. I've been an online figure for over a decade. The amount of experiences and the people and the rooms I've been in, the money I've been able to make, it's like, I can't bottle that up. You have to experience it. So I think sometimes the old school leaders want to put their head down and just do the work. That doesn't work anymore, right? You need to be more open, right? And you need to be more. You have to adapt to the times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And so let's think about like a case study, Pauleanna, of like a leader that you worked with where they came to you and they were like super fearful of the consequences. They didn't know what they earned the right to talk about. And at the end of it, like, what would you say was the outcome of them going through the process with you? Like, what can we say about like how they're now owning their narratives? Because I think for people, like, sometimes they need to see like case studies of like, listen, this is what you get when you actually do this. It doesn't matter where you start. It just matters that you do start. And this is what you ultimately can become.
Okay. So, I mean, there's a few different instances that I can share. We can talk about the civil unrest, when George Floyd unfortunately passed. We can talk about the recent assassination with Charles. Is that his name? We can talk about, I mean, there's so many moments that have risen in which leaders call my office and they don't know whether or not they should say something publicly, whether or not they should say something internally, and how to deliver this message, right? We could also talk about moments of opportunity when leaders have to um, give a commencement speech. Commencement season is very busy for us, right? How do I speak to the next generation? What parts of my story do I share? What advice can I give them that they haven't really heard before? I have a lot of leaders who want to craft their memoirs, right? And want to memorialize their legacy. And I love those when they, when I have like someone who's in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they've been there, done that, and they want to write about their story, right? Like, I mean, the case studies are endless, but I would say this, it's like I find joy in the process, because the process is when my clients really come alive, right? When they come to me, not all of them know exactly what they want to do, say, what they need to learn. In fact, some of them come to me thinking they need one thing, and then I'm like, actually, we need to work on this. But the question that I always get, and what's so interesting, because Oprah says the same thing, she's interviewed thousands of people, and she says at the end of every interview, someone whispers to her, "Did I do okay? Like, was that okay?" I get the same thing. I'll be in a meeting and someone will say, "Do you think this is a good story?" Like they want that validation from me. And I'm like, you have to believe it, right? You have to be like Nike and Google. We didn't like, they've created their story arc, right? And we only know what they've, the narrative that they've shown us. I'm like, you have to believe it before, like, I'm not going to co-sign that. Like, you have to believe it, whether or not I like it. And so I would say the biggest ROI is honestly, so there's internal success and external success, right? Obviously, the external success is the metrics, but the internal success and the internal healing and the growth and the confidence and the ability to be open-minded and create conversation and foster community, like that's what I really love to see. Like it's they come to me in one manner, and through the work with my team, they become an entirely different person. And that's really important to me, because you know what? I work for the good guys, and I've worked for some bad guys too. And so, at some point I feel like someone has to step in, like, and not be a yes man. And that's not me. Like, I push against the grain, I ask the questions, I challenge, and that's really important to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And you know what? I think the thing that you said just now that really resonated with me is that folks actually have to believe that their stories are good stories. And they have to actually have the mental models to say, I have a story worth telling. And I think sometimes I don't know, even me, like there was a lot of fear consequences that I had. I was just like, well, like, is my story, a good story? Like, there are a lot of brown girls from Brooklyn that like are on the path to trying to become something in leadership.
Mhm.
Does that actually matter? And then I realized, like, yeah, it actually does, because
It does.
while there are tons of us that are trying to do that, not everyone gets there, right? And I think by default of us actually like leaning into these things, we give more permission to people to say like, hey, I'm empowered to do this. I feel like I can do this too. And so the question I have for you, Pauleanna, is like, obviously there's great privilege in telling these stories and listening to people and really understanding their journey. And on the flip side, when people are telling their stories, you're also obtaining a lot of their energies, right? Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have you have to like curate an environment where they're safe, but that also is an emotional
Mhm.
toll for the writer, especially if folks get to the point of vulnerability where they're sharing
Yeah.
things that are deeply personal. So, as
Mhm.
a writer, what do you think have been like the guardrails and the wellness practices that you've put up for yourself that has
Mhm.
allowed you to create safe spaces for other people, but also making sure that you're maintaining your own sense of peace in these processes too?
That's such a great question. So before every meeting, I pray, right? I am a Jesus girl. Um, and I really ask God to bless me with the right words to say, with the right energy to bring to the table. to be mindful of emotions and feelings. And, I have to come with the right energy. I think that's first and foremost. The other thing is, I remember I had this client, she's a very major player in the world of cybersecurity. And she was smoking a spliff, and we were off the clock. She was smoking a spliff, and she's like, "Listen, if I'm gonna spill my guts, I'm gonna need you to spill yours." And she's like, "Tell me about yourself." I was like, "Girl, what?" But there has to be mutual transparency. That's a big part of my role, and so that's also why I double down on storytelling, because when I get into meetings with prospects, right, and they've reached out, I would say 9 times out of 10, before we even start the conversation, the sales call, like they've already bought in. And the feedback that I get is, I got lost in your content, which is a good thing, right? Whether they go to YouTube or Instagram or Threads or wherever, LinkedIn, like they can find me, right? And they can go down a rabbit hole of several years of content and storytelling. And so, like I said, narrative, building out a narrative can help persuade a potential client up to 50% over data-driven presentations, right? And so, yeah, I would say praying, bringing the right energy, mutual transparency, and giving them that vote of reassurance that you matter, your story matters. And what I do love is that not everybody is trying to write their story to become a New York Times bestseller, to reach a certain pinnacle of like external success. I have many clients who come to me and want to work on storytelling projects for their families and their legacies. Actually, some of my favorite clients are older, let's say mature executives who are retired and they're in their 70s, 80s, and they want to write a book for their grandchildren, right? Mm-hmm. Or, they are, it's just, yeah, I like legacy projects as equally as I love, the external successful projects.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's so beautiful. I mean, it makes me wonder, like, do I actually, in my 70s and 80s, do I want to write a book just for my grandchildren? Actually, that's not even something I've ever considered. So, okay, so then, I love the process, the praying, the mutual, commitment to transparency. Like all of these feel like such an important part of the writing process for people.
Oh, I forgot to mention therapy. Therapy is like it's always been a big part of my life, but especially with the nature of my role and especially with the agency that I run, because I do employ people and we all go through these ebbs and flows of like these major news headlines and whatnot. We have a team therapist at the agency who we work with. And then I also have my personal therapist, which I think every founder and entrepreneur needs to talk to a therapist, not a coach, not an executive coach, whatever, like a therapist where you can cry, vent, talk to, get feedback. That is like, I don't want to, invite the requisite professionals into your circle to help get you through those hard moments in your business.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. I think that a lot of founders and executives, like we're moving at the speed of light sometimes, right? And you do need folks that are trained, right? Like I'm like trained folks, trained therapists, trained coaches, right? Folks with certifications.
Yeah.
That like get you to think about, where you're at, your leadership, how you're leading, how you're creating environments for, success, because it's really important. And I also think it's a really important part of being able to tell your story, right? Because some of us might actually tell the wrong story if have we not done that work.
Yeah, exactly. exactly.
And so, when you think about storytelling for people, right, and them being able to leverage their stories to really heal themselves and share their authority or their confidence, are there things that you find as a theme in your work with leaders where they're like, I'm never touching this kind of topic? Was there ever, like, if you had to do a pattern recognition, do you find that there is a specific place where leaders are like, nope, this is my block, and this is the one thing I'm probably never ever going to talk about?
That's such a great question. And that's a question I also ask them when we're starting a project, like typically a book or a speech, because there's so many places we could go, right? So it's like, I'm aware of what bodies have been buried. So I always ask them, like, how comfortable do you feel? Yeah, I don't know. Like I can't I so here's the thing. We go through a very rigorous interview process so that I collect the data and the information that I need to create the products, right? And in that conversation, we put everything on the table, and then they trust me as the architect of their story and the final product. They trust me to decipher where we need to lean in, where we need to lean out, what needs to be told, what doesn't. It's a collaborative process. I'm going to say that. So like we put every single thing on the table, the skeletons, the secrets, the lovers, the affairs, the this, the that, the bankruptcy, and then we decide like what makes the most sense. Like I'm not I'm in the business of making dreams come true. I'm not in the business of exploiting anybody or making them feel uncomfortable, right? So collectively, I'll steer the ship, and I'll have an open conversation and dialogue as to like what we want to leave behind.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I love that you said that. I'm not in the business of exploiting. I'm in the business of like elevating. I think that's really important because I think a lot of people do think that sharing their stories is just oversharing of their life. And while I do believe in like privacy and intimacy and like having things just for you, I also think that like some of those things that people are trying to keep to themselves aren't things that like would be an overshare. Actually, are the things that would make them feel very humanistic and relatable, and it gets me to think. Go ahead, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think timing is important. I think pacing yourself is important. I
Mhm.
mean, like I've been online for over 10 years, and my story has been a slow drip. My story has been a breadcrumb that
Mhm.
people have followed. So yeah, you don't have to spill your guts in the first round. Like we're going to be here for a long time. I believe life is long, not short. So
Yeah.
just take your time and pace yourself. And it also needs to be very strategic, right? Depending on what you got going on, the season that you're in, your goals. Like I get all the information. I look at all the data points before I make a decision.
Yeah. Oh my God. The fact that you said I believe that life is long and not short is so funny because dad, my dad said that to me about a year and a half ago. And that when he said that to me, it actually defined a very interesting last 12 months for me. And so, yes, y'all, I will say life is absolutely long. It is not short. You don't have to leave it all on the table in 24
Mhm.
hours. You have the ability to just, I guess you could say, uncover things over time. And even me, a lot of people who had known me for like the work that I did with AOT, but like they had no idea that I was like into culinary or they had
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
no writing, right? And I think as time is passing, I'm getting more comfortable with doing that. But it took 10 years, to
I
get here.
love, I love that you said that because I had an executive. It's another thing that comes up in my meetings with executives because they want to perfectly curate a narrative when I'd like to color outside the lines. And so I had to remind a female executive the other day, I'm like, you are a whole person, right? You are complex, you are beautiful, you are messy, you are like there's a myriad of different things that come with being a woman, not let alone an executive. And so I love that you said that because I encourage clients to show different sides of them, not just like I've even received this feedback at some point where like one of my best friends, a guy, his name's Aaron, he said, "Yo, your life looks boring. Like all you do is work." And that it really wasn't true. It was just how I was curating the narrative. I'm
Mhm.
like, actually, nah, like I do a lot of cool shit. I didn't take the time to. So now if you look at the history of my content, I'm running in Miami, next to the sunrise. I'm in the pool in a bikini. Like I like being a CEO to me like I've redefined what that definition looks like. I've rewritten the rules, and I don't think it has to be straight laced. Now I know my community and I know what they love, and we have a great relationship because I'm involved and I talk to them. Not every I'm not saying every CEO or every leader has to like do what I do, but what I am saying is there's different sides to you, different interests, different loves, things you don't like. Like mix it up, mix it up. It should be a melting pot, not just I won this award. I ran this marathon. It's like, okay, like what's the story behind the story behind the story, you
Mhm.
know?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I think what you're hinting at is like the importance of people needing to see a range, you know? Like
Oh,
I was the queen of posting wins. It was like, got this, did this, here. But it was just like, all right, at some point I was just like boring myself. Just like, girl, like post that food content. You know what I'm saying? And so
yeah.
and I think once I started doing that, people actually reached out and said to me, like, oh wow, Jess, like I've really been seeing the growth. I've really been seeing the changes. And in my head, I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, this is actually like this is not new.
This
Like
is
I'm
your
not
life.
in
Yeah.
actual life. But I realized like people didn't know. And in a world where branding and marketing is part of like business culture now, right? Whether people
Yeah.
want it or not, or like it or not, like it is part of the ways in which people are doing business, you know? And so the question.
Yes. Like business, what I like to tell clients is like, if you don't take the time to do this, what's going to happen is you're going to be at an intersection where, you know, opportunity is going to be right in front of your face and you're not going to be prepared for it. I can't tell you how many deals I have closed sitting next to a stranger in the plane or like at the bar by myself, just kind of like chilling, or in the middle of like a lobby building. Like you just never know an opportunity is going to arise. And so you want to leverage social media and your one-on-one encounters as like a muscle that you're flexing so you can, right, because when the moment hits and you have to introduce yourself, that's a story. When you have to give a presentation, that's a story. But like, I think we're like, when we think of storytelling, we think of it so isolated, but like we're storytelling all the time. How you
Mhm.
deliver your body language, your expression, like that is storytelling too, right? The way you dress, your personal style, that is storytelling as well, right? So it's like you have to be very mindful because I do believe you will miss your moment if you're not paying attention.
You will miss your moment if you are not paying attention, y'all. I love it. And so then, Pauliana, like in a world where, obviously I think the theme of this has been like storytelling is going to impact the future of leadership and influence, whether you like it or not. And in a world that's also increasingly digital and it's an always on world, you have these new tools like ChatGPT and Gemini
Oh, girl.
and
Oh,
AI,
girl.
right? That might make it seem like it's easier for people to do their own writing. But let me tell you, like, as someone who has now for almost 2 years been writing from scratch, like, I promise you, there's only like 2 times I've gone to ChatGPT, and it was honestly because of editing. Like, I was like, I need to figure out if I'm actually saying this correctly. And to find an editor when I had to bust out the article like tomorrow, I was just like, this is not going to work out for me. But I believe in being purist because I think that like part of finding your voice is like, sure, you can train an algorithm to speak for you, but I have my personal mind hasn't wrapped myself around using these tools for that. And someone told me, it was just like, well, just like it sounds like to me like you'd be hustling backwards if it's going to take you this long to write something. But I'm just like, am I hustling backwards or am I actually just
I
like
had to take out my pen because I'm like, wait, I got
loving
shit to say.
the craft? Like I love the
Yeah.
craft of sitting down and writing. And so, what would you say
Hmm.
about these
Hit
tools?
me.
What would you say about these tools and why they actually don't work in the long term for this kind of skill set? Or maybe that's my opinion. What would you say about these tools in
So,
general?
I mean, I have a writing company, right? So I've received this question numerous times. And number one, it hasn't affected the business. Number two, the only way that we leverage these tools is for research, right? Even though like I'm still old school. Like over to my left, I have 3 giant whiteboards. I love a good mind map. I have a ton of I'd be writing all day, every day, sticky notes everywhere, right? Like I'm really, really old school, like high school, going to the library, taking out an encyclopedia. Like, you know what I mean? Like I love that. I love process too. So, but I understand that people want to be more efficient, etc. My question is, what are we learning? Right? So what people don't know is, so I teach part-time. I don't have time to teach. I make the time, right? So I teach a college class once a week. It's a business communications class. And, these topics come up often. One of the reasons why I teach is because, academically, like I said, I fell through the cracks as a kid. And the other reason why I teach is because we have a literacy issue in our country, across North America. We have, I would say, close to 50% of individuals, I almost want to say 60%, of individuals who read and write at a grade 6 level, right? We have a issue around critical thinking and problem solving. And we have an issue around curiosity and brainstorming. And so while it makes us faster and has its benefits, I also think that the conversation is lopsided, and we need to think about and also speak to the flaws in these systems, and the downside to these systems. And, I understand people want to save time, but what I will say about that is, I love to learn, and I'm very curious. And I enjoy the process of figuring things out. And I think we're losing sight of that. And I compare my process and the way we do things at the company as soul food versus fast food.
I love that analogy, like soul food versus fast food. Y'all, that is so tea. That is so tea. But it's so true. It's so true. I have a friend that we went back and forth on this topic because, she likes to move fast, right? But I think for me, because writing is supposed to be healing and telling my story is supposed to be healing, like I don't want to rush the process of, creating an environment for myself to leverage writing and leverage self expression to, I guess you can say, like expedite the process of me getting better. You get
It's
what
a skill that it's communications as a whole, but communication, so I'm talking reading, writing, and orally, like it's a skill that we all need to master. We
sure.
all need to master it without these tools. And if you can leverage the tools to help with editing, research, but I just don't understand why people don't want to learn how to read and write themselves. Right.
Yeah.
Even writing emails, like I hate, so, I'm on my email and Gmail and Gemini, like they put that, it's a very faint, like they tell you what they feel like, Gemini tells you what he or she feels like you should write to this person in response. And I never use it. And because the easy thing would be to be like, okay, send. But I'm like, no. Like, what are my thoughts and feelings? Right? How do I want to approach this response? What is the tone I want to use? What is the positive language? I like to work, like I love going through that process. Don't give me the answer. Do not give me the answer. It's almost like in grade school, we did long division, right? Pen to paper, and we figured that shit out. And now, as you ascend, you use calculators. It's like, no. I want to figure that shit out. It takes me a little bit longer, but you know what? My clients appreciate. I actually had a client came to me and was like, and requested a specific clause in our contracts stating that we would not use these AI tools and ChatGPT, you know what I mean, for the purpose of like the written work. And of course, like, I mean, we operate with integrity and we're ethical. And like, I was like, okay, duh. But I can understand why clients would want this transparency. And on top of that, I've had clients who snuck away and tried to use these tools because they thought they could do this shit on their own. And they ended up coming back because they were so unhappy with the end result. So I'm here to stay, baby. Like I'm not threatened. I do believe in staying ahead of the curve and staying very informed. So I'm not one of those leaders who is just so against it. I have a young team. They keep me fly. They keep me hip. They keep me like in the game, in the know. But I do come with old school principles, and I think both can exist.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. I think that like I think the idea that so in my mind, right, Pauline, because I go back to the history of literacy in our country. And obviously you're in Canada, and so I don't really know the history of Canada. So I'm
It's,
not.
I mean, it's across North America. The stats are very similar. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about like there was a world, I think people need to know there was a world where like we couldn't read and write, right? And I think that
We weren't allowed to.
we're not allowed
Yeah.
to read and write and
Mhm.
have this. And so to be in a world where like we are prioritizing efficiency over like understanding what a privilege it is to be literate is something that'll never resonate for me. I don't understand why we have to, as someone who's a person of faith, like I don't understand why we have to move this fast, because the reality of the situation is like when you have God in your life, you know that like no matter how fast you move, it's always going to be on His timing, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, and so
For
I
real.
um I go back and forth on this stuff. I remember my homegirl and I, when we were having this conversation, she fought me to the bottom. Like, I was like, girl, I think at this point, we're just going to have to tack this to creative differences, because I don't think I have to move that fast. But hey, it is what it is. And so one we're almost at closing. And so one of the last questions I have for you is like, if someone is listening to this episode today, right, and they're like, my story isn't big enough, my story isn't ready yet, what would you say to them about starting anyway?
What would I say to them about starting anyway? Start at your dinner table. Storytelling does not need to be public at first, right? Like I believe in baby steps, right? You crawl before you walk before you run. And earlier in the interview, I mentioned, watching Sailor Moon and Arthur and being a screen baby. And I also want to say that a big part of my exposure to storytelling happened at the dinner table at the end of every day with my family, or on Sundays when we go to my grandma's, or sitting in the pews and watching the preacher, which was likely my father, one of my uncles. We have several family churches, right? And listening to stories, or the stories of the congregation giving tearful testimonials at the front of the building, right? Like, so I think storytelling happens all around us. Storytelling is in our one-on-one conversations. When I schedule a girl chat on Zoom with one of my friends just to kiki and just to debrief the day, that's, I'm storytelling, and I'm telling her what's up, how I feel, what's going on in my life. So yeah, like story, like you might be fearful. Yeah, I can understand why the big stage is scary, but practice storytelling in your everyday life and it'll be easier. It'll get easier.
Thank you. And so what's next for you, Pauleanna, your agency, and then what's next for this season of your work? How can listeners support you, tap in, and learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, well, listeners can easily Google me because I'm everywhere. So that's number one, period. Second thing is I I want to keep the conversation going. I'm very accessible, so you can always feel free to email me. You can DM me. I love public speaking and I love talking about storytelling frameworks and best practices. I love talking about the industry that I work in because it's so like I'm a rarity, and so invite me to your company, invite me to your school. Let's get this shit popping. Like I really want to, my job, my role, my heart is to be a light for Black and brown women who are storytellers and writers, and they haven't considered ghostwriting as a viable option. And the last thing I'll just say is yeah, like stay in touch, right? I want to hear your stories. Like share your articles with me, share your podcast with me. Like I'm a very curious person by nature, and so I welcome all the links. And I'll definitely check you out and I'll give you feedback.
Amazing. Pauliana, you blessed us with so much insight today. Thank you for your honesty, your wisdom, and your genius. I think that what I got from this episode, even for myself, I was re-inspired to continue to tell my own story. And I hope that you all who are listening today realize that this conversation should have made you feel empowered to tell your own. I hope that everyone that got to listen today won't just shift their minds around their business strategies, but shift their minds about how they tell their story and how they instill confidence in their own ability to be vulnerable about the things that have got them to where they are. I do believe that leadership hides behind smoke and mirrors. And I think the more we tell our stories, the more empowered we give people permission, more permission we give people to feel empowered to do the same. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of Work. Don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on social media. Until next time, keep building, keep creating your own stories, and talk to you all soon. Mwah. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Behind the Work. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure that you subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and follow us on social media. I'm really looking forward to seeing and hearing how this show is leaving an impact on you.